And now, ladies and gentlemen, a very special format to close the conference. A shadow looms over the transatlantic world, a shadow of cyber Pearl Harbor. It is an ever closer threat that can never be ruled out entirely by security professionals and forecasters. There is no boundary that could be raised in cyberspace to separate us from it. When it arrives, we must be ready to deal with the consequences. I am deeply honored to introduce to you a fireside chat with Mr. Panetta, chairman of the Panetta Institute for Public Policy and a former US Secretary of Defense, who introduced the world cyber Pearl Harbor in 2012. He will be joined by Mr. Robert Siudak, chairperson of the Polish Cybersecurity cluster, Cyber Made in Poland, and a new member of the Cybersec program committee. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Mr. Secretary. It's a great pleasure and privilege to host you at our 4th European Cybersecurity Forum, a special edition for Brussels, Cybersec Brussels leader Foresight. To speak about strategic and public policy perspective, I couldn't imagine anyone better than this kind of a guest from the US. You served as the Secretary of Defense, you served as Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, White House Chief of Staff, and for a long period of time as well as a member of the US House of Representatives. You're also co-founder and chairman of the Panetta Institute for Public Policy. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Nice to be with you. Look forward to our conversation.
Mr. Secretary, almost a decade ago, you have been warning about possible cyber Pearl Harbor scenarios that should be perceived not as a science fiction or any kind of not possible, but as in fact imminent risk, like real scenario that have to be addressed both by the US, NATO, and as the transatlantic community generally. From the perspective of 2021 already, from now, in your opinion, what was done right since then? We acted timely, correctly, let's say with tangible results, either in US, NATO, or generally in transatlantic community in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, I don't think there's any question but that there is a greater awareness of the threat of cyber attacks than was the case when I first warned about the potential for a cyber Pearl Harbor. We have witnessed cyber being used now as a weapon to attack my own country in terms of what Russia did to our election institutions and the effort to undermine our institutions through the use of cyber. We've just witnessed a recent attack, again by Russia, that actually penetrated some major agencies, government agencies, as well as the private sector. We still aren't aware of the full impact of that cyber attack. But we've also seen our adversaries develop greater cyber capabilities, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And so the threat, I think, of a potential cyber attack that could virtually paralyze a country has become much more real and much more a possibility. And I think that while there is a greater awareness by the United States and other countries and our allies abroad of the nature of the threat, my fear is that we still have not really developed the kind of defense that we really need, the kind of coordinated defense to be able to confront these potential cyber attacks that could really impact on our security.
So you already moved to kind of a challenges that we in fact face now still in cyberspace. So looking ahead in this case, you mentioned a lot of instances from even last week or last month that in fact happened and took place in global cyberspace. From your experience, from your perspective, which of the emerging digital threat will be the kind of the most key when it comes to understanding them and then addressing them by the decision makers, both in the US and in the European Union? We do have a lot of instances, say, of value chain security issues, quantum breakthrough, a lot of topics on the table, and the question is like where we should focus, or maybe we should try to address all of them with specific different actions.
Well, having served as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, I think the most important weapon we have to try to get ahead of the cyber threat is good intelligence. If we have good intelligence and the ability to know when these potential attacks are going to happen, it will put us in a much better position, not only to develop the defenses necessary to protect our security, but to also develop the offenses that need to be part of our defense security system when it comes to cyber. I think we need both a good defense and we need a good offense. And to be able to have the capability to prevent the kind of damage that we've seen from cyber attacks, we've got to know when those attacks are going to be coming. And the only way to do that, very frankly, is through good intelligence, better intelligence, the kind of intelligence that really focuses on cyber threats. We've developed good intelligence when it comes to, knowing what our adversaries are generally up to. We know what our adversaries are oftentimes planning to conduct operations against our country. We have pretty good intelligence, usually when it comes to these kinds of threats. We don't have as good an intelligence capability when it comes to knowing when cyber attacks are going to take place. And part of it is just that cyber is this kind of multifaceted weapon that not only can be used for direct attacks, but can be used to place sophisticated viruses into our computer systems in this country and basically have them sleeping in these computers until a country decides to awaken these viruses and then proceeds to try to undermine the operation of those computers. So it is a capability that requires not only intelligence as to when these direct attacks are going to take place, but the ability to have intelligence on where viruses have been deployed in our system so that we know when we have been attacked, we know where those viruses are placed, and we can then take action to protect ourselves from the consequences of these viruses that can literally destroy thousands upon thousands of computers.
Thank you very much. So you to face this, in fact, challenges you mentioned, and also to work better on intelligence for cybersecurity and in cyberspace, especially in these turbulent times of that we see the coupling, evolving international order, and so forth. We need to cooperate with partners. And with this question, I would like to ask how you perceive the role of United States, European Union countries cooperation, specifically in the digital realm, in the cybersecurity, maybe in the intelligence on cybersecurity, or what are generally our, from your perspective, what are our common interests in this area, or maybe what are the main challenges that are still or have to be faced when it comes to real and deep cooperation on that?
Well, I was a believer, both as director of the CIA and as Secretary of Defense, that it was extremely important to maintain a close relationship with our allies and to be able to share critical information about potential threats. I know in the intelligence arena, there were regular meetings that we had in the intelligence area to be able not only to share intelligence, but to look at ways to better defend ourselves against these intelligence threats. I hope that as the United States now commits itself to again strengthening and building new alliances, that as part of that partnership, we will develop a cyber command that can serve as a forum to be able to bring key people from our different allies together, not only to share information, but to share what steps need to be taken in order to better protect our security. I'm not sure that that kind of coordination is as effective as it should be. We've always talked about cyber problems. We've always talked about the potential for cyber attacks. But I have to tell you, I always have this sense that we kind of have taken cyber for granted, that we have not really understood the full potential of the kind of damage that cyber can do. We learned a long time ago, I think it was Iran, using something called the Shamoon virus, very sophisticated virus, deployed that against Aramco oil in Saudi Arabia, and literally took down almost 30,000 computers. It literally destroyed the ability of Aramco to be able to conduct operations. We, frankly, have not been as aggressive as we should be at recognizing that cyber is the battlefield of the future. This is the biggest threat we confront, as far as I'm concerned. It is a weapon that can be used to conduct hybrid war. We've seen Russia use cyber as part of its hybrid war approach. We've seen China use cyber as a way to not only gather intellectual property and be able to attack systems within the private sector in this country for vital information. We've seen Iran use cyber attacks as well, and we've seen North Korea do the same thing. We know where these attacks are. We know when they've been conducted, but very frankly, we have not put together the kind of coordinated partnership that really focuses the United States and our allies in several key areas. One, gather the intelligence we need to know where these cyber attacks may be coming from, when they may be coming. Two, develop an approach that coordinates our defense systems so that we can all protect ourselves from those kinds of potential attacks, not only in government, but in the private sector as well. And thirdly, develop the partnership that is essential between the public sector and the private sector so that we are sharing information on potential attacks that are out there. We really need a stronger, coordinated approach to dealing with the cyber threat. And the more we just take this threat for granted, the more vulnerable we'll be in the future to attack.
Thank you very much. You mentioned already the kind of the role of private sector, not only as a potential risk when it comes to attacking, for example, critical infrastructure, which in big part it's in private hands, but also as a kind of our big advantages when it comes to transatlantic community. So my last question would be about this how to make the most out of this public-private partnership. So we know that to keep up with this, let's say, digital innovative race, not only on cybersecurity, but generally new technologies, we need to cooperate not only amongst like-minded countries, but also between private and public. Exchanging information is one side of that, but also supporting this civilian military fusion, we might call it. In your opinion, how NATO in this case should approach the issue of this civilian military fusion, just to make sure that our investments in new technologies, which are also not only building the market, but also building our strategic capabilities as US, as NATO, as European and partners.
This has been a frustrating part of dealing with the cyber threat. The private sector is targeted all the time by cyber attacks. Private sector develops its own ability to try to develop security against those threats. We now have in artificial intelligence the ability to develop autonomous systems that can provide better security. But very frankly, the private sector has kind of been operating in its own sphere, and the public sector operates in its own sphere. And while there has been some discussion between the two, there isn't that kind of strong, coordinated approach that I think is going to be essential in order to be able to better defend ourselves in the future. So the United States needs to develop a better partnership with our private sector. NATO needs to develop a stronger partnership with the private sector in Europe. We are in this together. We're in this together. If a major corporation takes a big hit from cyber and literally millions of individuals are impacted by that as a result, that undermines our security. So whether the attack is on the private sector or whether the attack is in the public sector, when you bring down critical systems in a country, you are damaging the security of that country. So, there just has to be developed a more trusting relationship. And I understand the problem. I'm on a board of a company in Silicon Valley. I understand the mentality that you kind of operate in your silo, do your own thing. But with the level of attacks that we've seen, I think it's going to be much more important for the private sector to be willing to reach out, to share information, to be able to develop common defenses so that we are fully protected from the potential of these kinds of damaging cyber attacks. But to do that is going to require the leadership, very frankly, of the NATO countries, the leadership of the United States, and the leadership of the private sector companies working together to develop a real partnership when it comes to building that kind of defense system against cyber threats around the world. We've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we are much better prepared to deal with those cyber attacks. We saw what the Russians can do. We see every day the potential of damage from broad cyber attacks that can undermine our security. We've got to wake up and realize that if we do not take action, better action, to defend ourselves, and yes, to have offensive capabilities as well, that one day we will see a cyber Pearl Harbor that can badly paralyze the security of not just the United States, but other countries as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope it's not going to take place before we will do our own job when it comes to building these capabilities of defending not only public institutions, but as you mentioned, the whole countries, the whole economies, especially in the Industry 4.0 time and all this automation that is happening. That's that's a lot of tasks already on our table to work with. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Secretary, and hopefully, of course, take my invitation for the next European Cybersecurity Forum, which hopefully will be able to take part physically in Europe, and you're more than welcome to the Cybersec community.
I look forward to that. I think it's very important to have those kinds of conferences and to share information. I've said cyber is the battlefield of the future, and we had better be prepared to deal with that threat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.